Yeah, all right. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning to those who are behind, and good evening to those of you ahead of us. You're welcome to this special edition of book presentation by one of us, an integral part of our organization. So, on behalf of the Center for Research on African Digital Policy and Innovations, I would like to welcome you to this book presentation where we'll be talking on issues of trust and markets in Africa, authored by an erudite scholar, Professor Kingsley Omeihe, who is a professor of entrepreneurship at the University of the West of Scotland, and has done a lot of. You can check his profile on Google. So let me not try to take much of our time because you're starting late. So our own center, the Center for Research on African Campus and Innovation, it has been designed to showcase work of African scholars as it relates to the digital turn in the world at the moment. So we're looking at those both on the continent, and we're looking at somebody in the diaspora who himself is an inventor and innovator. I hope he's going to touch on some of those things, as the program commences. So we're going to the schedule for the program is very straightforward. We're going to have him make a presentation on the cogent points in the work, and then we'll have our discussants, Professor Lawani and Father Charles Shionbo, engage him. Then we'll give the floor to every one of us. So, if you permit me, so I won't take much of your time because we are far behind time. I'll hand over to
There appears to be some network issues coming
regarding the
from.
work. Professor
Okay,
Kingsley.
we lost you there for a little bit, Dr. Layoku. We lost you, but I suspect you want me to start my presentation, and I'm happy. Except Dr. Uyi wants to say a few words.
No, just to say that to welcome everybody again, like Philip already did, and to say we're looking forward to engaging the subject with you, and to also congratulate you for putting out something this.
Yeah.
I think we are getting some feedback from Phil. Is it still?
Yes.
Dr. Philip?
Yes, there appears to be a network on his side. Maybe
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. Maybe the network could go. I was just trying to hand over the platform to Professor Omeihe to give us his expose on the work. Yeah, I'm sorry. I thought you heard all I was saying. I didn't know it went off. So you can write on.
All right. So we'll go with your cue then. I think you were asking Professor Kingsley to set us up for the conversation. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's what he was trying to say. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'll yield the floor.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Yi, and thank you, everyone. I'll just share my slides. And once again, I'd like to say a humble and sincere thank you to everyone who's made our time out of their busy schedule to attend today. It's really an important day for me to be able to present my monograph on trust and market institutions. And again, I couldn't have done it with incredible support of Dr. Layoko and other friends here. And I think my wife is also here, although she's using my own name here. So I suspect you might see me twice. But again, once again, I'd like to say thank you. And I really appreciate your making our time. I'll try to keep it simple. I don't want us to kind of belabor our time on terms of on the slides. I would run through the slides in the next 10 minutes so that we kind of have ample time for the conversations around the thematic aspects of this work. So again, the book is a product of my research done in the summer of 2017 and 2018 in northeast part of Nigeria. And my goal at that point was to examine the, will I say, abstract construct of trust. within market institutions in Africa. And my role there and my point at that time was to kind of explore how trust is an essential glue or an essential lubricant that kind of brings entrepreneurs or local traders together, especially in markets or in contexts such as Nigeria and other developing market economies, whereby formal institutional arrangements appear to be weak and inefficient. So I'll proceed to the first part of the slide, and I'd like to draw on this interesting quote by George Simmels, one of the learned thinkers in economic sociology of our time. And what George Simmels points out is that without the general trust that people have in each other, the society itself will disintegrate. And again, we've kind of seen what has panned out in the recent elections within Nigeria, both at the presidential and the gubernatorial and other elements of the electoral elections. And you saw that there's an absence of trust in the main electoral commission, INEC, that has been that got enough funding to conduct a very fair election. And again, the feedback and the general impression has been really that of disappointment, not just within Nigeria, but again, across the world. And again, this is because, one, there is that absence of trust, and because, one, the Electoral Commission, and of course, if politicians have actually failed that trust that actually exists within the society. So I think George Simmels' work in 1990 still re-echoes to today, that without that general trust that people have in each other, and also with the society, and again with the institutions, the society itself would disintegrate. But hopefully our country, Nigeria, would not disintegrate. So in terms of the research background, I think one of the most important elements of the Nigerian market and the Nigerian trade context is that when we have a compelling number of entrepreneurs, or what I call traders, who actually operate within the informal sector. Now, one of the questions you may ask is, why do they operate in the informal sector? They operate in the informal sector because they find it difficult to kind of engage in Nigeria's formal sector, maybe because of bureaucracies, difficulties in registering, getting a bank account, difficulties in registering with the Corporate Affairs Commission, difficulties in gaining access to single-digit loans or even loans with the banks, right? And perhaps difficulties in getting advisory services. So what has happened is that most of these entrepreneurs or traders that operate in this informal sector have actually looked at alternative means to doing business, right, within Nigeria's context. Now, a recent publication by the OECD and again by the World Bank in 2020 and 2021 argues or points out that about 85 or 75% of Nigeria's entrepreneurs or trader networks actually operate in the informal sector. And the informal sector contributes a huge chunk to Nigeria's gross domestic produce. Now, again, it's actually important to point out that within Nigeria, we've got weak formal institutions. And again, I always like to I'll draw you back again to the elections to see how the Electoral Commission appears to be weak and appears to be controlled by certain politicians because, one, is not independent. We've also seen the actions of the Nigerian police force, whereby rather than being independent and acting in the interest of the populace and interest of the people and promoting democracy and championing democracy, what has happened is that they appear to be overshadowed by political influences and political allegiances. Again, we look at the roads, look at the banks, look at the central bank itself, what happened with the case of the new currency in circulation. I think all this speaks to the existence of weak formal institutions, which again, if you compare this to what we actually have in most mature economies, like in the West, you realize that there's a huge lacuna, there's a huge gap between what we have at present back home in Nigeria and other developing market contexts at the same level of development with Nigeria and what we have in most mature economies. Again, what you face in some of these traders face, again, look at it from the point of the traders, they face access to credit, difficulties in enforcing contractual agreements because, one, they can't even go into contracts where because contracts are expensive and seem to be for perhaps the rich entrepreneurs or rich traders. So what has happened is, due to all these weaknesses and all these challenges and the weakness of formal institutions and weakness in law courts, weakness in the police force, weaknesses in getting bank accounts, and weaknesses of difficulties in doing trade, they've now looked at alternative ways to doing business, alternative ways to circumventing these limitations and challenges within Nigeria's market economy. So within the book, I've kind of gone ahead to look at four main or five main research questions. Again, but for the purpose of this study, I kind of take on the first two research questions, which is how do entrepreneurs perceive the formal institutions within Nigeria, and how does the concept of trust enhance entrepreneurial relationships within Nigeria? So going into the literature review, I think one of the key elements of literature is on the concept of institutions, right? Again, what you may ask is, what actually institutions? What do institutions mean? What do we refer to institutions? And I'd like to draw on one of the seminal works of Hodgson in 2006, and he kind of mentions that institutions can be defined as the prevalent social rules, or what we call structures of established frameworks that kind of guide and structure social interactions or the way we do things. Now, another definition by Lynn Zucker in 1985 suggests that institutions are socially embedded rules that define our path, that define the way we do things, that define or regulate our actions within the society. And Douglas North in 1990 argues that if institutions are not stable, if institutions are not strong, right, we will have difficulties in ensuring consistency in behavior. And we are actually saying that in Nigeria, because of lack of institutions, you can see that thuggery, or what I call agberocracy, is now the order of the day. So drawing on this concept of institutions, I think the assumption is institutions can be defined as the rule of the game, right? The structures that permeate action, that permit actions, the structures that guide our behavior and guide the way things are done. And again, if you have weak institutions, right, which are actually more pronounced in most weak developing market economies like Nigeria, it becomes very difficult to enforce or sanction defaulting behavior. You find it difficult to enforce malfeasance or irregular or negative behavior. And you can see how people can actually come out and threaten other ethnic tribes within Nigeria and nothing happens to them. Why? Because the police have failed in their actions to uphold the law. So this kind of takes me back to the concept of the institutional logics, and which is the theory on which this work is built upon. So the theory is like a foundation on which the study is built. And within this study, I've drawn on Thornton and Ocasio's concept of institutional logics. And this theory kind of explains that, one, that the cultural dimensions of institutions are often able to enable and constrain social behavior. It kind of teases out and highlights the role of culture as a critical determinant in the way we understand institutions. And the definition here is that culture, socially constructed historical patterns of material practices, those rules, those values by which individuals provide an understanding to their actions, right, is what kind of is the main point of the institutional logics. In a nutshell, what institutional logics as a theory simply means is that it helps understand how entrepreneurial behavior located within context, right, is able to continue to thrive. Now, having spoken about institutional logics and having kind of provided a definition of institutions as the rules of the game, as socially embedded rules that kind of champion or order our actions as human beings, as citizens, as entrepreneurs, it kind of takes us to one of the most interesting concepts, which is trust. Now, the question is, what is trust? What does it mean for me to say, I trust you to do your actions? What does it mean for me to say, I trust my government? What does it mean for me to say, I trust INEC, or I trust the police force? Trust, in a nutshell, is a set of shared expectations between either two people in a relationship or between people and institutions. Now, trust means that for me to trust you as an institution, I'm saying I expect you to do your work in a positive way that is free from negligence and free from malfeasance, right? Trust means that I expect you, by having that leap of faith, that suspension, that you will do what is expected. And that is what trust is a set of shared expectations. And the conversations around trust, some of the thematic or the themes that kind of emerge when you define trust is that, one, it drives on reciprocity, right? The citizens and people, they pay their taxes in the hope that institutions will live up to their expectations, right? The aspect of trust suggests that the institutions, or if that between two people, between two people, I expect it to be benevolent. If I'm talking about trust between myself and the state and the social systems, I expect that the state must be benevolent and act in the interest of the relationship. So if I was going to look at it from an individual and a state kind of based relationship, I expect that the state must act in my interest. And on my own part, I need to live up to the rules by paying my taxes and ensuring that I work in accordance with the rules. But again, looking at the fact that this book is all about entrepreneurship, right? The aspects of trust in terms of entrepreneurship and in the way people engage in doing their business thrives on three key elements: aspect of reciprocity, aspect of positive expectations, and aspects of benevolence. Reciprocity means a two-way thing. I expect you to behave positively. Expectation, I expect you to do what you're supposed to do. Benevolence, I expect you to behave in a way that is good and in the interest of the relationship. Now, one of the conversations we've had over the years is trust the same? Is trust the same in the UK and the US, or is it different from trust we have in Nigeria? Now, and this kind of divides trust into a cultural, general, or universal aspect, which is the ethic perspective of trust, or the cultural specific, which is the emic aspect of trust. So the cultural general or cultural universal assumes that there's a general applicable model of trust, that trust is general everywhere. But again, there are other arguments that are saying that trust is cultural specific, that trust is not the same everywhere, that your understanding of trust in the USA is different from your understanding of trust in Nigeria. So both arguments are both valid. But again, for me, I kind of adopt what I call an ethic-emic aspect, an ethic-emic perspective of trust, by saying why trust, yes, is generally and universally the same. Trust can also be viewed from a cultural perspective, a cultural concept in response to the context. And this is what kind of shapes some of the understanding of this study. Now, in terms of elaborating on the concept of trust. So like I said, there are actually three main types of trust: at the micro level, at the meso level, and at the macro level. At the micro level is the personal trust, which trust exists between two or more people in a relationship. At the meso level, which is like the middle level, this is trust that operates with organizations, right? At the meso level. At the macro level is what we call institutional trust, or society trust, or what Luhmann defines as system trust. So that trust that operates at the macro level, trust between institutions, trust with governments, trust at the macro level. So personal trust, again, from the first one, is where people, right, have trust in each other. Most times this kind of trust suffices when people are not willing to rely on the use of contracts or institutional arrangements. What they do is that they thrive on previous relationship. Okay, I know him from Okiare, I know him from my primary school, I can trust him, I can do business with him. Oh, I know his father, I know his family, I can trust him. So I'm kind of building that trust based on interactions and previous reputation. The second level of trust is what we call institutional trust. So what I've done is, because there are actually three levels of trust. So I've kind of taken out the meso level and kind of focused on the micro level and the macro level, right? So within the study, it's just the personal trust and institutional trust. So institutional trust is that system trust or societal trust, right? This is an individual or a collective action whereby we trust the society, we trust the institutions, we trust the government. And when institutions are strong, people are less likely to cheat. So because I know that once there are institutions that can enforce the way we do things, I'm not really scared, because I know once there is a malfeasance, I can easily take you to court, and I respect that the institutions will work in accordance with the law. But the question is, can we say that about the Nigerian judiciary? Can we say that about courts? Even when we do contracts, get into contractual agreement, how are we confident that the courts will actually work in a way that is fair, that will promote equity and promote justice? Now, Francis Fukuyama in 1996 argues that there are two different kinds of societies: high trusting societies and low trust societies. High trust societies are where institutions work, and there's high trust that permeates within the society, within people and within institutions. And you cannot get that in most mature economies like in the West. However, the low trust societies are societies where there's a lack of trust in people, right? If I borrow someone money in Nigeria, will I be confident that they will pay back? If I go for elections to place my vote, will I be confident that my vote will count? And even if there's a chance to go to the court to seek redress, will I be confident that the court will act in a way that is equitable, transparent, and fair? The answer to those questions is dismal no. So Nigeria and other developing market context or other countries that are at the same level of Nigeria that Nigeria is can be argued to be low trust environments or low trust societies. Now, again, so we've spoken about institutions, right, that kind of guide the way people's actions. We're talking about trust, that set of shared expectations. Now we kind of talk about networks. So networks are your ties, right? Networks are people within your network, people that you kind of engage with. They could be network ties based on religion, could be network ties based on cultural association, could be network ties based on your family. But again, in terms of network, the assumption is that there's always that norms of reciprocity, that you must be expected to behave in a way that is benevolent. There must be that trust. So when you break that trust, people will find it difficult to kind of work with you within those networks. So for you to be able to enjoy the opportunities or the benefits of those networks, trust is quite important. So those kind of forms the shape or will I say the conceptual framework of the study, speaking about institutions, trust, networks, and norms, kind of the way that is acceptable within the society. So having read about those things, what I now decided is that, okay, this is what I've read within the study. Now, my goal now is to go into the field to find out how this works within a Nigerian context, within and across Nigerian traders. So in 2017, I set out from the UK and went back to Nigeria. And my goal at that time was to understand how trust works within Nigeria. But more importantly, is trust different across Nigeria's cultural blocks? How do the Igbos perceive trust? How do Yorubas perceive trust? How do the Hausas perceive trust? So this is me now. I've gone into the field, and in terms of doing my study, I kind of use some of this methodological framework. And perhaps I won't go much into this detail, but my goal was to kind of get into the heart of the field, to kind of examine this trust from the lens of informal entrepreneurs within Nigeria. So again, these are some of the elements in which, as a qualitative researcher, you just need to make sure that you follow to ensure that your work is of good quality, right? So what I set out to do was, I said, okay, I was going to follow the advice of expert scholars to look at informal traders within Nigeria. And what I did was I came up with a number of about 52, guided by the recommendations of what a good number for a qualitative research is. So the difference between qualitative and quantitative, you're looking at a very large sample size, you're looking at experimentation and numerical statistication. But with qualitative study, you're bringing yourself into the real world of the local actors. You want to understand their lived experiences. You want to be able to ask them questions, get their narratives, immerse yourself into their real world to understand what happens within their real world. So my goal was to investigate trust from the lens of informal traders, from Igbo traders, Yoruba traders, and Hausa traders. So this kind of a snapshot of some of the traders at which I looked at. Now, most interestingly, most of these traders operated in the informal sector. A lot of them were uneducated. A lot of them went, perhaps none of them had degrees. But what I found out in northeastern part of Nigeria, in Boko's market, in part of the north central, and also in parts of the border market in Lagos, was that there was an incredible level of trust that we haven't actually even identified within Nigeria and within contemporary studies, right? So these are kind of my multiple sources of evidence, but I just want to move in straight into the findings, right? So what I found out was that for instance, in one of the main markets I went to, Boko's market, I realized that there was a great market whereby people did business without any recourse to formal institutions. There was a large trade going on in Boko's, and there was an absence of banks where people were doing business. There was an absence of use of checks, the absence of the use of contracts. But people were doing businesses running into millions and hundreds of millions of naira, right? Without any elements of police security, without any elements of bank loans, without any elements of even good roads and security. But I realized that there was something underpinning these relationships, and it was the aspect of trust. So for instance, I was privy to be at situations whereby someone would do business running into a 5 million naira, 10 million naira based on an oral agreement. So I would say, okay, I'll give you these loads, I'll give you these goods, right? Go and sell, bring it back to me in the next 2 weeks. And it would happen. So what happens at those markets, those associations, or those network of entrepreneurs, they've been able to build a unique structure, a unique association based on trust. They thrived on oral agreements. Sometimes they could even write agreements on a piece of paper, on a tissue paper, amounting into millions of naira. But there was something underpinning those relationships, and it was because of trust. So some of the responses I got was that, how is it possible to work with trust? Then some of them say, well, you understand me, we discuss these things and we allow people to carry their groups, and we make sure nobody violates the verbal agreement. Now, the issue is that once you have a verbal agreement and you go against the verbal agreement, you will be ostracized from the market. No one will do business with you, right? It's because, one, they believe that that trust must be enforced. And for you to be able to enjoy the benefits of that market, you must ensure that you keep to those aspects of trust. Some of them say, we don't sign contract, we don't even do agreement. We know ourselves. Some of them would have been in business for the past 20 years. Some of those structures actually exist even back to when they are, it's like generational kind of attachments. So the assumption is that trust kind of is that glue, right, that kind of permeates, that kind of holds those relationships together. So this is me in some of those markets back in 2017 and 2019. So kind of a summary of the findings. So what I found out was that, of course, when I asked them, so when there's a problem, do you guys go to the law courts, or how do you perceive contracts? So a lot of them argued that that the courts were seemed to be for the rich, they were bureaucratic and too corrupt. That even the police force, that when they even call the police to resolve problems, it never works well. So what they did was that they kind of set up what we call trade associations. And these trade associations are what I kind of refer to as informal association or informal law courts. And what they do was that they provide quasi-regulatory functions in ensuring that trade goes on seamlessly without any limitations or without any challenges. I also found out, like I mentioned, that the respondents, all the traders within the market relied on oral and written agreements underpinned by trust. But again, I also found out that all those trade networks have kind of evolved, right, to fill the role of formal institutions. I also realized that there were religious institutions, right? So for instance, there's one called NASFAT. Some of you might know NASFAT. It's a Muslim religious association, but it kind of provides some kind of reputational guarantee to traders by saying, yes, you can do business with him because he's a member of our association. I also realized that there was the growth of cultural institutions, whereby people join cultural associations, and by being members of the cultural associations, they're able to do business together and also to leverage on their networks, not just within the country and outside the country. Now, so most of these networks provide an opportunity for price setting and ensure that people conform to the existing norms and conform to the existing rules within the society. So I think with that being said, so these networks now, these associations, the cultural associations, if the role of family, I realize that family is a strong institution more than we really understand within Nigeria. So I found instances whereby families that have actually emigrated out of Nigeria, operating in Burkina Faso, in Ghana, still maintain their trade ties in Nigeria, such that their networks here in Nigeria are able to export goods to their families back in outside the country based on trust without any formal agreements. And their families over outside of Nigeria will do those businesses and remit the money and ensure that this business continues to go on. Now, most of these things are things that some of us already know, but its magnitude is what we don't necessarily understand, because it's incredible in terms of value, in terms of their contributions to the economy. Again, I found that religious associations, religious ties, religious institutions also provide loans to some of these traders. So this is not what a religious institution should be doing. These are what banks should be doing. But being members of those religious associations or religious institutions, those religious institutions can bank on your reputation, bank on the fact that you will repay your loans and are able to support you and provide you with referral to do business. But again, all these things are underpinned by trust, because one, by relying on trust, people are able to do their business. I also found an interesting aspect of what we call transitates, and those transitates are what we call middlemen. And those middlemen are tied to some of these entrepreneurs based on family, on religious associations, on cultural associations. And what they do is that they're positioned within border markets. And what they do is that they take goods from one party and are able to negotiate those goods and sell to other parties. But again, it's based on trust on those middlemen. So those middlemen or those translators serve as middlemen who provide rich and specific form of resources to traders. Again, I've spoken about the family and kinship and ethnic ties. Now, the question is, what happens when people break trust or when you violate trust? So when you violate trust, many things happen. One, you are ostracized from the market. What it means is that there's an informal order that goes through, not just within the markets, but also across other associations, that no one is to do business with you. And what that means is that, one, you are going to struggle. And because most of these organizations, most of these businesses are legacy businesses that you hand over to your children, you don't actually want that to happen. So everyone is scared of those sanctions, right? And they always ensure that, one, they are work inconsistent with the rules of those informal institutions. So I think the general consensus, and I'm going to stop here because I think I've run beyond time, is that, one, a lot of people have kind of ignored the role of trust. A lot of people have ignored the role of entrepreneurs who actually operate in the informal economy, right? And I think it's high time that the government also sees how they can support those informal traders and also support all those informal associations, right? Because this lack of neglect may kind of justify some of the reasons why we kind of remain underdeveloped, right? So again, what I found out was that there was a lack of banking services, traders doing businesses with huge chunks of money. A lot of them have been affected, have been disturbed by armed robbers on the roads. Again, there could be opportunities to kind of onboard some of these traders and provide them with simple electronic banking services to ensure they do their businesses. So again, I think perhaps I'll kind of stop at this point. But I think the summary is that, one, we trust and some of these entrepreneurial networks, I think they've grown over the years to fill the void in which some of our Western institutions, our formal institutions have not been able to fill. And I think to date, they've been very successful in operating within Nigeria's peculiar context. So I kind of stop here. I think there are aspects for me. I can take lots of questions. I couldn't go much into the detail because of time, but I'm happy to take more questions as we go on. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Kingsley, for that wonderful expose of the contents of the book. And it's quite interesting to learn about how things that we ordinarily take for granted are drivers within market institutions in Nigeria, and of course, by extension, in Africa, and how such indices as kinship ties, religion, and other communal factors play important roles in driving businesses and trade, across the continent. Thank you very much. So we'll now invite Professor Lawani to help us make his own interventions. Professor Lawani, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Phil. Dr. Kingsley, thank you again for bringing this out and for the effort, the pain, the rigor doing this work. I can't say it often enough that when the product is seen, people forget the process and the pain. You can only imagine how much this has cost you. Congratulations. Thank you. So
Thank you so much.
I'll put my two questions at the end, but let me preface my comments first by saying that I'm guilty as charged. I was hoping I'll at least have found time since after Dr. Laiku intimated me about this to read the book in its entirety. I couldn't quite because I had to make a quick walking trip to the UK, to your neck of the woods. I didn't get back until last weekend. I should have had a copy of that book with me during the trip. So, but having said that, I'm not unfamiliar with the field, with the area. I've dabbled into the issue of trust and its connection with market hierarchies. Not too far in my past. So I feel competent to make some comments. I think that the way you approach this study gave it solid credibility because there's no better way to understand what you were trying to get at here than by being in the market, so to speak. And I could see from the data you put up that you had some kind of diversity in the different segments of the markets that you interacted with. And so it adds a lot of credibility to what you found. I'm just curious because we know that even in the developed world, that so let's take, for example, the recent failure of the Silicon Valley Bank and how it has impacted on the notion or the concept of trust, even in societies where institutions work, right? That when markets fail or when hierarchies fail, there's a fracture in the trust element between and among, between participants and among them, and between participants and the custodians of these hierarchies, whether that is the feds or whether that is the ministers or the central bank or whatever. So it then brings to the fore that a study like this that appears to be micro in nature has impact at the macro level, right? And you were right in making those connections between, especially in our context, or in the context of Nigeria as a developing economy, that, well, how do you trust the organizations or the agencies that facilitate our political process, our political life? How do you trust the agencies that are supposed to regulate the function of our society, law enforcement, the judiciary, and so on and so forth? And how this then percolates down to the micro level. How do I trust my neighbor not to encroach into my property? How do I trust the mailman to deliver my mail to my doorstep? And so that the aggregate of all of these interactions then impact on the direction or the progression of a society, of a people, and of a nation. So your work is absolutely, timely. It is the simplicity of it, I should also say, makes it even more profound. That you could pick the concept, use it to address an issue that is meaningful and impactful. Because trade, as we know, is really the bottom line in addressing the development of a nation. In economics, we generally accept a domestic product, the gross domestic product, as a proxy for how an economy has thrived over a period of time. And the truth is that the most important, the only element in the domestic product is how well you have traded, right? That you made so much and you were able to exchange what you made for value. So thank you. So the two questions I will pose, and then let the rest of the house comment, and let's start the discussion and the debate on the book. Is that, one, have you considered, in extending this study, have you considered kind of doing a side, well, let me not say side by side, but kind of like a next level study? You have looked at the interaction of trade and the entrepreneurial aspect of it. How about the connection then of the engagement between the entrepreneurs and the next level in their own transactions? So, for example, if I'll just use an example that my own personal experience. My grandmother was a trader of yams. And so she traveled and traversed the length and breadth of Nigeria buying yams in bulk. So whenever yams were in season in the Benue area, Zakibiam, Vandekia, Kasinala, she was there. Whenever yams were available in the eastern part, whether it was in Ida or Nicha, Enugu, or in Kaba or Kene, she went there. And whenever they were locally available in farms in the Edo State area, she went. And the truth of the matter is, the yams were given to her by farmers, not fully paid for. So in other words, she came and traded the yams, went back, she deposited some payment, went back to make full payments, collected another batch of yams. And I always wondered, Grandma, why didn't you just always finish paying them? He said it was a balance of risk between her and the farms. One, she wasn't sure that all the yams would sell. Two, the farmer too couldn't keep the yams on their farms. They needed the farms shipped out. Worked out in everybody's favor. So for the entrepreneurs, then the next level. So you've talked about how they interact. Get this stuff. Use it to develop their businesses. But when it comes to the trading part, between the entrepreneur now as the frame of reference, their buyers and their, what's the kind of trust relationship? How does that then help us aggregate to fueling our institutions, right? Because if we create communities of trust, the aggregate of it is that somehow our institutions will get developed, right? So whether it's from a cooperative or whether it's Or it's like having the NBA, the NMA, the ICANN, all of these people who have trust relationship within them that are kind of, and you addressed it in one of your points. You made reference to it. But what's the next level? You know, is there a study, or have you considered looking at it? The next level for the entrepreneurs now in engaging with other communities or other sectors that they have to interact with to get their stuff made. And then the second question now would be, is it really true that that our institutions, the deficiency of our institutions, should we take it per se, or is the question really a failure of our culture to accept elements like trust, right? Are we just wired by default not to give and take, which is crucial for trust? So is it true that institutions are not the way, or is it that there's a cultural, because we find Nigerians or people from the developing world in diaspora, it's not the fear of the sanction from institutions that make them conform. It's by nature, the default tends to be that I want to be a part of a healthy and viable society, right? So first question, what's the next level for you after this study? Using the entrepreneurs as a frame of reference. Second question, is it true that the institutions themselves, we can take it per se, that there's something in the institutions that make them untenable for us as citizens? Or is it us, the citizens, who have accepted, who have refused by default to be willing to give and take, and therefore to imbibe a culture of trust that then escalates to institutions and to the agencies that after all, these people are manned and run by Nigerians, not by aliens. So we speak about INEC and the police, and they are as if they are not Nigerians. They are our brothers, they are our sisters, they are our friends, they are our neighbors. We know them, right? So these are the two questions, and I'll yield the floor. Forgive me, I didn't mean to take so much time in taking my commentary, but I can't find enough words to thank you and to congratulate you, and also to thank you for putting this together. So I yield the floor.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Professor Lahani, for that wonderful intervention. And for I love the fact that you pointed us in a very recent direction of the Silicon Valley Bank and the challenges there. And what came to my mind as you spoke was the controversy surrounding the use of cryptocurrency and its volatility, and all these things hinge on trust, to say that there is no really strong centralized mechanism for guaranteeing the trust within the layers of verification and approval of the blockchain, using cryptocurrency. And so, well, if that's the argument against a decentralized system, then how come the Silicon Valley Bank, that is so, renowned or reckoned with, is also having this kind of problems of collapse and stuff like that? Does it have to do with trust? These are the things that ran through my mind. But without much ado, let me invite Father Charles Shombo to make his own contributions. Father Charles.
Okay, thank you everyone for giving me this opportunity to just express some views. I must say that I took this on board because of the trust Professor Olaokun has in me, because I have nothing to do with this topic or subject area. However, I've taken time to peruse and to go through the book, 7 chapters, well developed. So I want to thank Professor Omeihe for doing a fantastic job. I love the methodology. I love the presentation. I love the fact that you took us from the beginning of the book to the end. You wanted to tell us a story. You told us a story, an experience, and you ran it up by also telling us your findings, implication for policy on this book. I must say that one of the things I found unique about the book is the fact that it answered the question of the possibility of studies, and talking it from an African experience. Our own story should be told by us, not by Leo Frobenius, who talk about the history of West Africa without stepping a feet on West Africa. So for you to be able to drive all the way from Scotland to fly to Nigeria, to really go into the arts of the matter, to go to the markets and to see the people who do the business, how to do it, and the findings and your initial challenges on the field, I must really commend you. So having indigenous entrepreneur experience to be an alternative to the weak and ineffective formation of the former institution is what brought about the issue of trust. And I see that this trust network that you talk so much about is very important. Why is it important for me as a of a student of psychology? Is from the very definition you made about trust. I looked at it that you made a very categorical statement in your findings or in setting up the conceptual framework that is a psychological state of a trustor, and applying it in a social dimension. That for me was a very unique thing, trying to, establish a link between what happened in our psychological state and how it's embedded in our social networks. And I was like, oh, this is a huge responsibility when you have expectation, when you have, a positive outcome in mind, that the other person is going to behave as such. Entrepreneur's behavior is going to be, as expected. I said that is a very, very huge responsibility whoever is doing trade is having, on the other person. But however, the trust within that social political reality, it takes into that account of your study. And I like the case study you cited. I like the reflexivity of the research process. I like the critical approach you brought it, because you, using the qualitative method, you were able to immerse yourself on the field to be part of it. And the fact, based on your experience, that people didn't trust you at the beginning, they thought maybe you're from the government, you're a police undercover, tells you how trust is. Because I'm looking from the framework when you talk about the theoretical framework about being, embedded in our culture. Culture for me is not something that it is inherited. Culture is something that is learned. So I started looking at the book from the point of view that where do we learn to trust someone? It's learned. And if culture is learned, is trust learned as well. So how do we talk about, and I like the fact that you talk about how we talk about the how trust, when you have issue with trust, promises are broken, how we can repair trust as part of the experience of entrepreneurs. And I was looking at one point, I said, why is juju, the use of juju, not part of the ways people conform to all these, trust issues within that setting, because it isn't part of our way. But the most important thing for me is the fact that the networks are open, they are alternative to former institution, the weak and inefficient former institution that we have. And when all of this are broken down, people need to survive. People need to go on, life needs to continue to move on. And that is why the institutions that shape the entrepreneurs in Africa, they're very important. Talking about the sociocultural institution, the middlemen you talk about, the family structure, the religious leader. And when you talk about the religious leader, I know of my own experience when some time ago, people wanted to invest, I had to introduce some people to an investment, which I was a part of. And because I was making money, then I told another priest, another person. Before we know, we got about 7 to 8 people involved in this investment. And all of a sudden, they packed up, and I was like, oh, this is a very big responsibility, So to have religious institution being part of this informal institution, advancing, the way the market traders, unions, and association, they go on with their work, I found that, very interesting as well. And also the fact that there's even trust repair, in the whole framework. For me, it was very interesting because since human beings are involved, like the Professor Lani said, that is it in our default mode not to comply, not to conform, not to seek an advancement of humanity, because it has to do with the problem of humanity. And so whether you're in the UK, you're in America, you're in Nigeria, the human person is universal. But the meaning in which we take into things are maybe what shape us and vary our own involvement in the way and manner in which we do things. I like the fact that you also brought the practical implication of this trust-based network relationship, about how it is relevant in that book, how the Indigenous Welfare Association take a central role in making sure that traders, African traders, are able to even advance. Because if the informal institution, they also, experience what the formal institution also are having as problems, then we are just back to the beginning, to the status quo. But if there are welfare packages, association, and other people who are, people believe in them so much to be able to assure that these old network continue to move on, then this trust-based network relationship is very important. And I like the fact that you have argued in that book that indigenous institutions have evolved to be able to fill the gap which all these former institutions have failed to fill, which for me, it's good, but it raises a question about replacement and collaboration. I try to look at it that if informal institutions are getting advanced and working so well, are they replacing the formal institution? Is there a place for us to have collaboration, or is there just them acting? Because when they act on their own, I'm foreseeing a problem, or I'm foreseeing a challenge where, the leader, the middleman, the translators that you talk about will at one point or the other will now become a leviathan. They'll control prices in the market. They're going to control what goes on, who sells, who doesn't sell. Then, of course, because we are Africans, tribal men, tribal issues will come to place. And all of those factors, that can limit the advancement of this informal institution and everything, they stand for to be able to achieve. I like the implication and the potential implication of your study, the scope of the policy of your study, and of course, that you've also covered in the book, of how the informal sectors can be strengthened, to provide employment and sustainable growth, which I felt that's groundbreaking. But yet, I'm still thinking about where is the role of training? That is there any form of training for this informal institution, or we just leave it in the hands of middlemen? They leave it in the hands of people, going on and on with their business with oral and on written contracts and agreements. And I think it's good, but I'm looking at it, how do we facilitate that? How do we promote that in the light of technology that we have today? Do those middlemen, do they have any form of training or technological advancement, in application to what they're doing, with these market traders? I think for me, that's about a summary of the 7 chapters of the book. I took time to go through it, but I want to leave the floor open if people have any other comments to make about it. But this whole summary is that you have done a good job to be able to establish the abstract concept of trust from psychological perspective to social context. You have been able to identify institution, the trust, the repair, and also, in moving forward in African entrepreneurship and market trade union association. So thank you very much, Professor Kingsley, for doing a fantastic job.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that insightful insight. And for me, I was really impressed to see that you've kind of covered the scope and the breadth and depth of the book in detail, capturing those key themes that kind of emerged through the book. And I would say I'm really, really impressed. In fact, you can actually present this book better than I could have done. And I'd like to say thank you for taking our time out of your busy schedule to be able to peruse the book and provide such unique and fabulous insight. Thank you so much.
Yeah, okay,
perhaps I
so
can go into
yes, please
respond to
answer the
some of the
questions.
comments.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so I think lots of questions have come, and Dr. Omeihe has asked. Shemba has actually made some comments, and I can see Pinel Momo also has something in the chat box. So let me just start the other way around. So I'll start with Soyombo and go back to Dr. Omeihe. So yes, I do agree for the need for trainings for these informal entrepreneurs. But again, what we've seen is that some of the interventionist strategies, or what we call prescriptions that have been offered, are not usually culturally specific, because often case the assumption is, how do we bring out these informal entrepreneurs out of the informal sector such that they can operate in the formal sector? Now, the question is, why have they not operated in the formal sector prior to now? It's because of the difficulties of doing businesses. Now, we always argue that Nigeria is perhaps fourth in the matrices or the index sector of the ease of doing business. But again, those ease of doing businesses are perhaps focused on the multinational enterprises or the more advanced medium-sized enterprises, and of course, multinational corporates. Now, how does that affect and benefit the average trader, like who is grandmom or his mom or other local traders within the market? The question is, there is really no ease of doing businesses for them. Even most graduates sometimes find it difficult to open a bank account. So you can imagine an average trader who might actually have faced those kind of difficulties. So what has happened, what can happen is those trainings should be specific. Those trainings should be tailored to saying, how can we support the informal sector? Not how can we take from them or continue to tax them, but how can we support them? How can we support the associations? How can we support those networks? How can we provide contacts and collaborations with other networks outside of the country? So I think by providing those kind of prescriptions in terms of support and training, absolutely, I do agree with you, Sheyombo, that there is scope to support those informal traders and encourage them in terms of aggregating their potential. Now, this kind of underscores some of the comments Dr. Omeihe mentioned. How do we aggregate these? How do we aggregate these? I think there's a lot of noise coming from your end, Dr. Philip. I'm trying to mute you. Okay, yes. So again, in terms of aggregation, I would argue that there are lots of these associations, a lot of these networks around Nigeria. There are many of them operating. Again, what they do need is that support in terms of training, support in terms of advisory, support in terms of even providing infrastructure and providing that ease of doing business, providing even banks for this informal sector. We have the Bank of Industry, but again, one can argue that, again, its effects are not necessarily felt in the informal sector. We've also have SMIDAN. Again, why they try to provide support at those trainings, there are lots and lots of these aggregations that can be actually supported in terms of trying to upgrade and accelerate the momentum in those areas. Now, another point you did mention, and I think I put it down here, another point you did mention was around the instances whereby those transitors can actually have an upper hand in terms of price setting and creating arenas for domination and controlling the way markets operate. And absolutely, I do agree with you. In fact, that already exists. So what has happened is that you find out that rather than those middlemen doing price setting, you kind of find associations protecting the interest of its members. So what happens is that those associations provide what I call an umbrella for trade by providing such succor and support for its members. So the assumption is that by providing unique collaboration and contacts with other members outside of the market, providing loans and support, providing price settings and discounts for its traders, they want to be able to draw in more entrepreneurs or more members. But again, one thing they always do is try to uphold trust, because once there's a lack of trust in those associations as institutions, then that relationship becomes broken. So while those associations try to work in the interest, that collective interest of its people, their role is to also ensure that they're able to provide that governing or that quasi-regulatory function in ensuring that business works in an effective way, ensuring reciprocity between its members, and ensuring benevolence and collaborative entrepreneurial spirit. And that kind of takes me to Dr. Omeihe's question. I think Dr. Omeihe's questions kind of draws on so many aspects. Now, you spoke about the next level, and I think the next level is quite an important question. And for me, I think one of the key things that you kind of do when you finish your research is they ask you, what is the future direction? And at that point in 2017, I kind of looked at it from 3 cultural blocks and realized that there were different ways in which people did enacted on trust. So, for instance, one thing I did mention, I failed to mention, was how some of the Muslim traders did business based on swearing on the Quran. I also realized more of the local indigenous business traders also did their businesses based on sanctions from using the juju, like Dr. Father Soyombo mentioned. So we realized that there are some of these cultural elements that kind of permeate the way these businesses operate or the way things work. But again, for me, what the next level again was to say, okay, since I've looked at it from 3 cultural aspects, how does also trust work around other ethnic minority groups within Nigeria? Because each time we speak about Igbo, Yoruba, and Hausa, we forget that Nigeria is characterized by 250 ethnic groups. So is trust also different? And one thing I also focused again was looking at trust in terms of exporting. So how does trust work across borders? So in terms of Nigerian traders and traders within West African markets or other aspect of sub-Saharan market, how does this trust across borders work? How are they able to bridge this psychic distance across borders? How are they able to defend their liability of newness, or what I call liability of foreigners, being a different, operating in different markets? How are they able to penetrate and gain entrance to new markets? And how does trust as a lubricating factor ensure that glue? So I tried to also look at that. Another aspect again was saying, okay, while we've looked at trust from a developing market context, can we look at trust with other countries that are the same level of Nigeria, but in a different context? So perhaps maybe trust within Nigeria and trust in Pakistan, right? A cross-cultural comparison, or cross-cultural comparison within a less mature market and a more mature economy. I think there are kind of scopes to also look at it. Next level again could also look at, rather than look at the qualitative research, can say, okay, let us look at a quantitative research at a larger sample population, a larger population, and say, okay, what can we derive from a quantitative research? Because I'm a qualitative researcher, and I'm kind of, I do not really subscribe to the positivist leaning. I do believe that for me, a qualitative research brings me closer to the real world of the local actors, and it kind of helps me understand their lived experiences and their understanding. Now, there's an interesting question that Dr. Omeihe mentioned, and he spoke about about trust in the society. That how does trust in the society work? What is the problem with Nigeria in terms of our culture, and in terms of that culture of distrust, culture of having that safeguard or being on guard because you do not believe that trust would work? And I do agree with you, because again, like I did mention, we are a very low trust society. But the question is, why are we a low trust society? I think for me, a very good instance is an example of mine. I think this was in 2018. I traveled to visit my family, and we said, okay, let's meet in Dubai. So that's my first time in Dubai. And I went to Dubai. And because I was excited to see my wife, and I'd not seen my son and my daughter at that time. In fact, my daughter was first time I saw my daughter was 1. So that was going to be the second time I would see my daughter. I was so excited when I got to the airport. And in a hurry to go and meet my family in the hotel, I forgot my bags at the airport. And I ran to the hotel room, and I was with my family and my wife, and we were jumping up and excited for like two hours. And I started to look for my bag to bring out all the gifts I brought from them from Scotland. And I realized my bag was still at the airport. And I called the taxi, and I drove back to the airport in Dubai. This was after 2 to 3 hours. And guess what? My bag was still where it was. My bag was still where it was. And for me, that was the biggest element of surprise. I've never, and I believe most of you too will be surprised to kind of hear this. And I took my bag and I boarded the taxi. And I asked the taxi driver, my bag has been here for 3 hours. What happened? He says, no one will touch it. It's the culture. It's the society. And I tried to probe him. But one thing he did mention was that, one, they had strong institutions, that we are shaped by strong leadership. What we do not have in Nigeria is the presence of authentic, transformative, real leaders who are servant leaders. It's a combination of authentic leadership, an authentic of servant leadership, an authentic of transformative leadership who are trustful leadership. Trustful leaders. How many leaders can you call to mind in Nigeria and you say, I trust this leader? Perhaps one. You could argue that we don't have leaders. Again, if we have leaders that can uphold the law, and you can see what happened with the central bank, and the Supreme Court mentioned that this law should stay hold till the end of the year. And the central bank and the president went against the law of the Supreme Court. So what will happen next time when the Supreme Court makes an order or gives a ruling? No one will believe in the Supreme Court. And remember, the Supreme Court is the highest decision-making body of the land. But again, that is leadership, because one, the leadership has failed in showing people that this is the way we should follow. Now, it's also good to mention that we look at the West and we look at most mature economies. We look at the UK, the US, and even Dubai, and you ask, why are they strong? Why is there a society of trust? Why is there trust more among people in terms of personal trust and at the society level? The truth is, many years ago and many centuries ago, these institutions were at the level where we are currently. But in those days, it was different, because when you stole, they would behead you. When you committed a crime, they will sanction you, and they sanction you by either killing or dealing with you. In fact, in Dubai, they don't joke with those kind of penal offenses that actually lead to death and loss of life. In fact, in Nigeria, I remember when we used to have real sanctions by suicide squad at the bar beach. Because one, people know that once I commit a crime, there are laws that will checkmate me. These are the penance. This is what will happen when I go against the rules. And again, there are courts and institutions that can actually ensure that these things work. It's not that when I commit a crime and I go to court, or because he's from the north or from the east, he will go free. So when there's the right leadership shapes the direction of the institution. And once institutions work, we kind of have what we call societal trust. Because when there's trust in the leadership, the leader says, I'm going to do this, and he's going to do this. And it kind of feeds into the institutions, and it feeds into the way we live as a society. And just like Shoyombo did mention, that do we learn culture? That culture is learned? And absolutely, like Hofstede mentioned, that culture is a product of socialization. So if you live in a society whereby there is no trust, as a kid, your father gives you 10 naira to go and buy a biscuit, and you come back and you put the change in your pocket, it's because of what he has learned. So as a result of that socialization, right, people learn things. But again, we can also unlearn things. And unlearn things starts from now. Right, by having the right leadership, by having a leadership that kind of ensures that the rule of law is enforced and is as it should be. This kind of permeates automatically into the society. I remember, I'll give a last example. When President Buhari came on board as a president, and I met him at a traffic junction in Maitama. Now, there's a traffic light. People don't really care about traffic lights in Nigeria, some of you know. But he stopped at that traffic light. And that was the first time in Abuja I saw people stopping at the traffic light. But that leadership, by stopping at the traffic light, what I realized was that other cars down the line stopped. For me, it was just a normal incident. But what it means is that if the leader does the right thing, people would follow. I rest my case, and I'll stop here to take more questions. Okay, and I think there's a question here from Pinel Momo. And Pinel says, I would like to know more about the loss of trust and rebuilding of trust in economic context. Absolutely, and that's a brilliant question, Pinel. I think, what is distrust? Distrust is the opposite of trust. If trust is a set of expectations shared between two people, distrust is when there's that lack of trust, right? So, and some of the reasons of trust is one, unmet expectations. When people make promises and they fail. So for instance, people in a relationship, and I promise to be loyal to my wife, and I break that trust. She's not going to trust me. As a politician, I say, yes, I'm going to build these roads, and I'm going to create schools, and I'm going to ensure there's infrastructure. And I don't do that. What's going to happen? You see what happened in these elections? People voted out the wrong leaders. So again, That is distrust. Distrust sets in when there's unmet expectations. But the question is, can distrust be repaired? Can trust, when broken, be repaired? Can trust, when violated, be repaired? Absolutely. Again, it takes a lot of intervention. And sometimes what this means is that, one, you need to be able to build trust and rebuild trust or repair trust. And how do you repair trust? By speaking to the people and showing good faith, showing that you want to make those repair process and you want to be able to live up to your words. Sometimes in terms of the entrepreneurial space, when we say that people have broken trust, we bring in intermediaries, more like middlemen, more like elders, more like family people to kind of help resolve trust. But again, at the institutional level, it's very easy to repair trust. And repairing trust is by making sure that your word is your bond and not reneging on your promises, and convincing the electorate that you're a trustful person and you lead by example. Thank you so much. Dr. Omeihe, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Kingsley, thank you, Professor Kingsley. Can you hear me, please?
Yes, we can, but it's breaking.
I'll just have to put up my video. Yeah.
Yes.
So, okay, so let's open the floor. Yeah, our time is fast spent, so we'll open the floor to some comments and see. But I hand and let's take one or two questions before we round up.
Yes, I apologize for keeping us very late, but again, let's just take one or two questions and that's it. But thank you. Ebenezer, you have a question. Please, over to you quickly.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, so Ebenezer's hand is up. Ebenezer, you can go, please.
Yes, thank you, Prof. That was a great presentation, and apologies I came late, but from the little I met from your presentation, I discovered that the concept of formality and informality are really central to your work. And these are two concepts I've always grappled with too, especially when we talk about indigenous institutions in Africa. We tend to describe those institutions like you do in your work too, the market, women, the trading activities that you talked about, we tend to describe them as informal and then as a sort of alternative to the so-called formal institutions. And I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on whether or not you have had to grapple with this concept of formality and informality and how to describe these institutions. And another thing that really bothers my mind is we tend to frame these informal institutions as alternative, and many people have also commented today, have spoken, and the last time I remember, the so-called informal sector is the highest employer of labor in Nigeria. So the so-called formal institutions don't even, for instance, if people are looking for formal employment in Nigeria, they are not available, just like in several parts of Africa. So people do this, petty trading, hawking, which we tend to, call alternatives. So I don't know how to frame the question, but I was just wondering if you've ever grappled with this concept of duality, creating duality and sort of framing one as, supreme and the other as an alternative, which happens in the concept of formal and informal, because it's something I also grapple with in my work. What specific criteria do we use to frame something as formal, especially some things that are indigenous to us? Because some of the things they talked about, the trading activities they talked about, even the formal system that we have now, the supermarket system, the court system, and stuff like that. So those are just some of the things that were bothering my mind, and I was wondering if you could shed more light, because it's something I also grapple with a lot in my work. What is formal? What is informal? Does that not create some sort of hierarchy to say this is better, this is an alternative? So thank you.
Absolutely. I think that's a very brilliant question. And I think for me, I'll kind of point you to some of the work.
Yeah, let's take the second question. I can address the both.
Okay, so just upload those and then we'll round up. Okay, that's fine. Austin, you want to ask your question?
Austin, stand is up too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Austin, please.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Appreciate your work, Professor Kingsley. Mine is just focusing
there's another hand up. So
yeah, we'll just take those two questions, the three, then we stop, then we round up. So we don't keep us too long.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was saying that I was just commending your work, and you you pointed out something you experienced in Dubai about the bags you forgot at the airport. I wouldn't say it has to be on trust per se. It has to do with strong institution. It has to do with consciousness of security. That airport has cameras everywhere. Anyone who tamper with your bag can easily be identified and can be prosecuted. And that also happened in Abuja here. In Abuja, if you forget your bag, the only thing that will happen is that the airline will go keep them until you come back. Again, that's a strategy, just to be able to keep that. But I think that the challenge with our trust system has to do with, I can link it up directly with Peter Eke's work, where he talked about the primordial and the civic culture. There's trust. There is strong trust within the primordial culture. There is weak trust in the civic culture. Primordial in the sense that in a community, if you steal, I mean, not necessarily if you steal, if everybody identify a particular family as a family of rogues, anybody coming to that community to do business with that particular family will receive the kind of advisory they will get. Whereas in the civic culture where you have weak trust or less trust, there's a tendency to use paper qualification and all to secure some competence that you don't have. In the primordial culture, the competence, the integrity is community-based. And that's something I think I needed to bring out, that what your experience at the Dubai airport is similar to many other airports. People have not been to too many airports, but at least I had the same experience in Angola airport, in Luanda. The bags were there. And the fellow told me, no, look at cameras everywhere. Anybody that tamper with it can easily be traced. And that just brought me back to Abuja, because we have not had cases of, even, let me give you something very remarkably, personal experience. In Abuja, local flights, not even international flight, local flight. I was going to pass my face cap, as small as face cap, through the security machine. And because I was in a hurry, I left. I traveled for 5 days, came back, went to the point. They told me if anything is missing here, you can get it back. They took me to the storehouse. They gave me back my face cap. And I've had experience of someone who left his computer in the airport in Abuja, went to the US 6 months after, came back, and the laptop was given back to him. It is systems, it is institution. And if institutions are weak, trust will be weak. Thank you very much, Prof.
Thank you, Ebenezer. I'll just take one final question because a lot of people are asking to leave. So I'll just ask, Tony, your final question, then I'll just take the conclusion.
Right. Good day, everyone. Professor Kingsley, thanks for that good presentation. I just want to follow through from what Ebenezer spoke about just now. For every single transaction, whether it is relational, whatever it is, there are different levels of trust. Because come to think of it, you enter a vehicle today, you have at the back of your mind a level of trust that that vehicle will get you to your destination.
Absolutely.
If you are in a relation, you are expecting, your partner or the person you're in a relationship with to, respond in some way. There has to be a level of trust for any form of interaction or transaction. So just like he mentioned, yes, institutions and structures that are well in place entrench those kind of trusts. Because come to think of it, you take Nigerians or from their correct location and put them even in a Western location where these structures are in place. Those Nigerians will conform.
Absolutely.
They will conform. So it goes beyond, yes, there's a level where it is personal because you learn a lot of things, you grow with a lot of things, and then the more you do things, you get used to them. However, when people build different levels of trust and the structures are strong enough to further entrench them, you have a society that thrives. So in the contractual one, you mentioned somewhere in your presentation that somewhere in the north, you found some level of trust in their marketing relationships that you could not even fathom the magnitude that was there. And that was basically cultural, that had grown with that institution as a culture.
Absolutely.
And the more the people practiced it, the more they got used to it, and the more it was further entrenched. If somebody comes outside of that culture and then goes against it, it is easy to even tell apart. And
Absolutely.
the more the person stays in that culture or within that society, the person is likely to conform to that mode of living. So
Absolutely.
beyond personal inputs for trust or distrust, trust or mistrust, the institutions and the cultures that entrench them further in society are very key. Thank you.
I don't think I could have answered that question better than Tony. The way you've done is like you've also done this research with me. And I think absolutely your points are very, very valid. And in those societies, what we've seen is that culture as alternative institutions have kind of permeated and kind of governed the society and kind of govern actions, and just to kind of point out in terms of what Austin did mention, right? It is trust in institutions. It is trust within the society. Remember, you said societal trust, but again, societal trust and systems trust is the same as institutional trust because there is a system in place. And I think Tony makes a valid example, saying that you take Nigerians out of Nigeria, whereby they can urinate by the bus station, they can urinate anywhere, and bring them to the UK. They don't do those things. They change. Why? Because there's a system in place. There's a system trust. There's a society trust. The way things are done. And this kind of takes me to, I think, the question that I think someone asked, I think it's Ebenezer or someone else who asked about the concept of those institutions. Now, I think the question around institutions is that a lot of people struggle with the concept of institutions. But again, I think an easy way to put it is that institutions are constraints which govern social and economic and political interactions. And it is particularly explained because institutions are the rules of the game in the society. And it reduces all those or certain behavior where you can steal someone's bag from the airport, or certain behavior whereby you can urinate anywhere you like. Now, Douglas North in 1990 argues that formal institutions can be defined as those constitutional and legal framework. Formal institutions, constitutional and legal framework that shape the society. While informal institutions are those uncodified, or those socially transmitted customs, socially transmitted values, traditions, and attitudes embedded within the society. So these two, right, sometimes they operate in sync. But sometimes when the formal are recognized to be very weak, you find out what I refer to as institutional rivalry, the interplay between the formal and informal, whereby people tend to recourse more on the informal because those informal are now recognized as durable systems of embedded and established rules that structure social interactions. So again, in Nigeria, what we have now is, like in most societies, these informal and informal institutions. And with the informal institutions, in my research, I found out that these are really strong, concrete, socially transmitted rules, but again, they're dependent on developed social culture, like Anthony mentioned. And this kind of includes your norms of behavior, the way you relate, your social conventions, the way you operate, and the ability to render actions that are acceptable. So for instance, if you do not operate and confine within the rules of the associations or the rules of those networks, what happens is they kick you out, right? And you will no longer enjoy the benefit of those associations. So I think I've just received a message that we need to stop at this point. But again, I'd just like to say, I really, really appreciate everyone who has come in here today. I'm really, really humbled. And please, I'm on LinkedIn. We can always easily connect on LinkedIn, especially some of my old university friends and high school friends who are here. But I'd like to say thank you to Dr. Olayoko for the incredible effort of putting this together, Dr. Uyi, Shoyombo, and everyone, Anthony, Pinel, everyone who has come here today. I'd like to say thank you so much. I'm really humbled, really impressed, and I hope that we can always keep up the contact. I've missed Anthony and I. We went to primary school together. He's here. He's smiling. We went to primary school from when we were in primary 2, primary 3. up to secondary school. So I'm really humbled that he made out time to be here, and he was also at my wedding. Unfortunately, I couldn't attend his wedding, but again, I'd like to say thank you to him, thank you to everyone, and I'm really humbled and really blessed.
Yeah, there will be naming ceremonies for you to attend too. All right, thank you everyone. So see you very soon on our next event. During our next event.
Tony,
all right, guys, thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks everyone. Yeah.
Bye everyone.
I'll connect you.
Yes, please. Now. Yes,
bye,
please.
Austin.
We are going to share numbers. Yeah. Hello, everyone. See you very soon. Yeah. Yeah. All right.
Guys. Take
bye.
Care, guys.
Bye.
Okay.
Good to see you again, Dr. Philip.
Bye, everybody.
Yes, Mr. Austin. Good to see you. Well done, everyone.
Yeah, right.
All right.
Okay.
Bye.
Ciao.
Yeah.
Ciao. Yeah.
Ciao, ciao.